The patient has anemia. The reticulocyte count is very high. Again, the patient is not improved. So, the reticulocyte count is a very common investigation which is sent in a personal patient with anemia. But is it very easy to interpret this test? Let's discuss it in this video. So the report we get when we advise a reticulocyte percentage is the number of reticulocytes per the number of RBCs. So why do we say that this reticulocyte count is falsely high in a patient with anemia? So what happens in a patient with anemia is the RBCs are low. The reticulocyte number by the RBCs number, it gets elevated. So even in a patient with anemia, the reticulocyte percentage can be elevated. So, the reticulocyte percentage is just a ratio. It does not show you the marrow response. Now, what do you mean by corrected reticulocyte count, which we calculate in a patient with anemia? So, in a patient with anemia, we correct the reticulocyte percentage as per the patient's hematocrit value. Basically, helps us to remove the false elevations that occur due to anemia, that is due to a low RBC count. The corrected reticulocyte count tells us what the actual reticulocyte count be if the patient's hematocrit was normal. Do you really think calculating the reticulocyte count is that easy? We're not done here. The process continues. So next we have to calculate the reticulocyte protection index. So now what actually happens in a case of severe anemia? The bone marrow produces immature reticulocytes. So these immature reticulocytes have a longer lifespan than your normal reticulocytes. So the normal lifespan of a reticulocyte is 1 day. But in the case of severe anemia, the immature reticulocytes which are released early into the blood stay for a longer period, making the counts look higher than the actual production. So now, what does the reticulocyte protection index do? It corrects the reticulocyte count not only for the early immature reticulocytes and also for the reticulocytes which are in your blood for a longer period. Now your question might be, now what is this maturation factor? So the maturation factor depends on the hematocrit value. So it basically just tells you how long your reticulocyte might survive in the blood. So if your hematocrit, that is if a patient has severe anemia, that if the patient has a low hematocrit, the maturation factor increases. Now your question might be, I've calculated the RPI. Now tell me, how do I interpret this? So if your RPI is more than or equal to 2, it means that there is an adequate marrow response. But if your RPI is less than 2, that means your marrow is failing or there is an inadequate marrow response. So just by calculating the reticulocyte count correctly, you get to know whether the anemia is due to destruction of RBCs or whether the anemia is due to failure of production of RBCs because of your bone marrow failure. So always remember, never trust the reticulocyte count alone. Make it a habit to calculate the corrected reticulocyte count, then your RPI, and only then come to a conclusion.